Want to introduce myself. My name is Amy Zaslansky. I am the founder of Book Fairies and one of the co-founders for the National Book Access Association. We're going to do just a little bit of housekeeping initially. If you can go ahead and just change your name so it says your name and then the organization that you're with. My hope is that the more that we do these webinars, the more familiar faces become, the more comfortable we are in reaching out to one another. That is the whole goal of the NBAA, is that we no longer feel like we're working in a silo anymore. If you have questions, you can reach out to one another and get that dialogue started. So if you have not yet joined NBAA, I encourage you to do so. And our whole goal is just to work on best practices, sharing resources, and overall strengthening the book access community. I am excited to have Jill Gonzalez on. She is going to be moderating the chat. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to pop it in the chat and she'll let me know if I'm missing any information. All right, I am going to end the poll. It looks like we have a few beginners. Most people are fairly comfortable. And that is excellent. The more comfortable that we are, the more that everybody can start sharing their information. I will tell you that I've been doing nonprofits for 13 years. I know a little bit, but not a lot. And everything that I've learned from talking with you guys and from attending webinars and learning. So if you have additional information to add, I would absolutely love for you to feel comfortable to jump in. I'm going to move this out of this screen share for a little bit. Let me see. All right. So now that we've got that part started, let's just talk about the webinar goals. My main goal is that you are walking away with 2 actionable items. If you walk away with 2, I consider this a win. I go to a lot of webinars. I know that in the nonprofit world, everybody's time is very tight. And so you want these webinars to be effective and impactful. And so that's the whole goal. As long as you walk away with 2, we're going to be talking today about ways to design an effective nonprofit program. We'll talk about identifying the community needs through community needs-based assessments. We'll also talk about ways throughout where you can measure your impact and what you're doing to make sure that the program that you're creating is as beneficial to the community that you're helping as possible. Now, all throughout, we're going to talk about funding. So going into fundraising, that's going to be a very different type of webinar. But what my hope is, as we go through each slide, you'll see how by creating a strong program, it's actually going to lead to an increase in funding. Let's pop right over. So programs. Now, what I did is broke down programs into about 12 key elements. And here's where I want to just lay down right here and say, this is the blue ribbon in program development. Having each of these aspects is going to make your program as strong as possible that you can then present to your funders. I would say almost none of us have all of these elements, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. There's going to be some people who are happy that they've collected books and they're giving them out. That's step 1. But what I wanted to do, and the whole goal with NBAA, is to almost set up a scaffolding. So you can look at where your current program is, and then you can look at what you want to add to continue to build out that program. So as we go through, kind of look at, is this something that I can add to my program? Is this possible given my time that I have, the resources that I have? Is this something that I need to put off for next year? But we're going to talk about research that needs to be conducted, community needs assessment, setting program goals, creating an action plan. We'll talk about stakeholders all throughout, A little bit about budgeting and funding. Now, we are going to have KPMG will come in May, and they're going to do a full presentation on basic nonprofit operations and setting program budgets. So I'm only going to hit on this a little bit. We'll talk about impact and feedback. By the end, I think everyone's going to be exhausted, and we probably won't get to marketing, sustainability, scalability, risk management, and DEI. We can always look to do that in another webinar. So when we're talking about creating an effective program, one of the first things that you want to do is your research. All of us are providing books, and it's not hard to convince people that kids need access to books. It's an easy thing. People get it right away. Yes, kids need books. But when you're talking about reaching out to funders, you really want to show that your program is evidence-based. So you want to actually do the research to go through and find what studies have proven that kids need access to books. What benefits come out of them having these access to books? And so what it does is it creates your talking points when you're talking to funders. It is the information that's going to go into your grants, and everything is going to be very handy and put into one package. When you're doing the literature review, and let me just go up to here, one of the easy things that you can do is use Google Scholar. When you go into Google Scholar, you'll type in exactly what you're looking for: children, book access, literacy. On the left-hand side, you'll see that you can choose the date. When you do your research, most funders are looking for information that's within the past 5 years. You can extend it out to 10 years. If you go past that, really the only studies that you want to pull from is if they're talking about standard information, such as reading increases self-esteem, increases family bonding, but you want to try and stay away from the statistics. And I think it's pretty common that we're using statistics within all of our grants that can be up to 20 years old. I'm not sure at this point if the access rate is one book for every 300 kids, which I know is a stat that most of us use. It could be more than that. It could be less than that. So making sure that you keep your stats relevant. The next thing, now this is something that I've been working on, so if anybody wants to help me with it, this would be fantastic. This is not yet in the resource hub, but my goal is for the NBAA members is that we have a general repository of data. So for example, these are United States statistics. We have book ownership, parent-child interaction, and you can go in if you're writing a grant and you want to pull the statistics. You can say, okay, in 2022, illiteracy cost an estimated 2% annual GDP. But there's also going to be a rationale for, there's also going to be a rationale for funding. And there will be a link. So when you're writing your grants, you can just pop over to this information. And this is something that is in the works. And all right, let's come back over to here. Oh, and the last one, let me show you real quick, is going into our resource hub, which is going to be right here. Now, there are a number of studies that are already loaded. You will have access to this resource hub through your membership. These are the studies that I'm able to put into open source. There are studies that I'm not able to for copyright, so there's still going to be more information that you can pull. All right, going back. So that is the literature review. Again, that is to show that you have an evidence-based program. The next thing is reaching out to programs that are very similar to yours. And that's where the NBAA is really going to help out, because you have access to so many different organizations. Find organizations that are doing the same type of program or similar enough to what you're already doing. Start reaching out to them, have conversations, figure out, are you running it as effective as they're running it? Do they have different data points that they're collecting? If you're just starting a program, reach out to people. The best question that you can ask them is, if you had to do this program all over again, what would you do different? And the reason that funders want to see this, and something that you want to show funders, is that you are building your program off of successful models that are already running in other parts of the country. And finally, you want to conduct a needs-based assessment. And what that is talking to the community that you're looking to impact to find out what they need. Funders really like that because you're showing that the program you're running is going to be relevant and essential to the community that you're working in. I wanted to spend time talking about community needs assessment because I think that this is a huge room of opportunity for nonprofits. And this is nonprofits across the board. Um, from everything I've seen, nonprofits, we have so much passion and enthusiasm and excitement. Uh, we truly want to make a difference. We're coming at everything with a good heart. But I think sometimes nonprofits do to a community instead of working with a community. And that may be because of limited time, limited resources, not understanding exactly what questions that you want to ask. But if you take the time to talk to your community, what happens is you start engaging the stakeholders, the people that are receiving your services, the people that are already working within that community. And what you'll find is that program is going to be more effective. It's going to be embraced by the community. It will generate more support, and it will continue on as you start working with more and more communities. That one community will feel very vested because they've had their input um, acknowledged. So when we're talking about community needs assessments, the first thing that you want to do is figure out what community you want to work with. When I started Book Fairies, this was a huge topic that I wrestled with, was what area did I want to target? And this is where you really want to sit back and talk with your board and figure out your geographic focus. So are you looking to target one school district? Do you want to reach a town, a county, a state? Do you want to be national? And a lot of that is going to depend on, again, your time and resources. But there's pros and cons to both of them. And I just want to talk through those a little bit. So if you're looking at covering a larger area with your program, with minimal books, you have a lot of benefits there. You have increased visibility, you have increased reach, you have increased funding potential. The cons is that it's going to be a lot harder to track impact. The kids may not get all of the books that they need to truly show that impact. And it's just harder to manage the logistics when you have a much larger area. Versus if you're going with a smaller area, you're going to have a greater impact on the child. You'll have a greater impact on the community. You'll get to know the stakeholders better. But the cons are there may be some exclusivity that people feel because surrounding areas are not able to access your services, and you may limit the amount of funding that you receive for your program. So it's something to talk through with your board to make sure that you're focusing the resources in the areas that you're directly looking to target. Next, you want to figure out your demographics. Are you looking just to impact babies? Are you looking babies and toddlers, Do you want to do just elementary school? Or are you looking for just that grade 3? Um, are you looking for baby through adult? And all of these decisions are really going to change how you provide your services and the goals that you establish. The next thing is actually doing the community needs assessment, and you want to collect data from your stakeholders. Your stakeholders are going to be the children, the parents, the teachers, the community centers, the nonprofits that are in the area, any government or local municipalities. I would definitely try and find out um, who the big movers and shakers are in the community. So there may be people that have a lot of power within the community and a lot of sway, but they may not hold any positions that you would directly know about. I would reach out to the schools and figure out, because if you can get those main influencers of that community on board, you're going to have a lot more support coming your way. Now, when you do your data collection, that is going to be through interviews, focus groups, observations, surveys. And I think one of the hardest things, and one of the reasons maybe we don't do community needs assessments, is we're not exactly sure what we want to ask. So this is where, let me pop back over to ChatGPT. For any of you who don't know me very well, I am a ChatGPT generative AI addict. I think everybody should be using it. It has revolutionized my world and increased my knowledge base within the nonprofit world. It is easy to use. I put in a complicated prompt. You don't have to. Just have a conversation, just start using it. They say it takes about 10 hours to be comfortable with using any of the generative AI. Now, this is specific Chat GPT 4. It is a paid version. It's $20 a month. I highly recommend it. But when you're doing your community needs assessment, you can simply put in, you want to always give it a persona. So I gave it that you are an expert nonprofit executive director. And I said, create a 10-question survey focusing on gathering data. And what you'll see is that as you scroll down, it will give you the questions that you want to ask. And then you can continue to ask ChatGPT additional questions, and you can tweak your survey from here. But this is current availability of books, ages, types of books that are most needed, primary language. This is a great one. What are the biggest barriers to book access in the community? This is what you can use when you're writing your grants. So that way you can explain what the landscape is currently like. How do people typically access books? So ChatGPT can create both the surveys as well as any interview questions or focus group questions. So I highly recommend using this program. All right. So now that we have gone through, and let me just pop back over here. Hang on 1 second. I love doing Zoom when you lose all your screens. Okay, so now we've done the needs assessment. We understand what the community needs, and now it is time to figure out what our program focus is. This, to me, is of primary importance. So let's go through, when you're creating a program, you want to figure out what is the impact that you are looking to make. Now, impact is what is the lasting change in that community that you hope to make? That when you are done with your program and you step out, what is that change that has been brought to that community, such as higher education rates, increased self-esteem, strengthened family bonds? And once you figure out what that impact is, then you can start creating your program. What I would recommend, and this would be an interesting activity for any board members that are on here or any executive directors, is during your next board meeting, ask your board what impact they think that your nonprofit is making, or what impact is each program making. Um, I've had a couple conversations and it's been interesting where each board member thought that the nonprofit's goal was to make a different impact. And so their viewpoint and their lens was very different. So making sure that everybody is all in line with the end goal of your nonprofit. Now, there is a very big difference between promoting the impact you want to make versus outputs. So to bring it all the way back to that basic level, what I'm seeing is that a lot of people are stating their impact as the number of books donated, the number of children they reach, the number of volunteers that they have. All of these are output numbers. Input numbers would be the number of book drives that you're doing, the number of books coming in. Um, when I started Book Fairies, I had a very smart gentleman say to me, I don't care how many books you're giving out. What I care is what those books are doing. And it took me years and years and years to understand that because I was so underwater with trying to understand the nonprofit world to begin with. I'm an occupational therapist. Um, and what he was really trying to get at is you need to define the impact that you're making within the community and then back out your program from there. He said, I would rather you gave out 10 books, but that child now loves reading. I'd rather you gave out 10 books, but their grades went up. So start rethinking how we state impact versus how we state our outputs. All right, so figure out what impact it is that you want to make for your program. And you want to set goals to reach that impact. Every program should have 3 to 5 goals. And these are goals that will set the direction. They're what you eventually want to achieve. They're the pathway to that impact. So your goal can be, I want to expand book access. Your impact would be because kids have access to books, they are now reading more and they're able to move through the school districts and they're able to graduate. Increased literacy rates is another goal. So each program should have 3 goals. And then each goal, you want to have 3 objectives. Now, objectives are SMART. So they are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. My board chair my last board chair, he was constantly saying, that which gets measured gets done. So if you're running a program, make sure that you have your goals set, your staff understands what the goals are, they understand their objectives, they have a path that they are working toward. By having your goals and objectives, you're better able to allocate your resources. There's no confusion between people's roles and what they're looked to do. And ultimately, what this does is to go back to the funding side, is now you're showing to a funder, hey, we already did our research, we've talked to the community, and this is the program that we've come up with. Here are the goals that we are going to look to achieve, and here are the objectives of how we're going to make that happen. It is so specific and concise that funders are going to be immediately pulled in because you know your stuff. You've got that data down. To talk about funders real quick. Funders are your partners. Funders are, think about it this way. funders have goals that they need to reach also. So a funder has to answer to their board. They have to present what impact that they're doing. So think of your funders as your partners. Sit down with them, have a conversation. Hey, we love that you're part of this program. What are your goals? What are you looking to achieve with by supporting our program? Make sure that your goals are aligned. But by understanding what their goals are, you're going to better be able to give them the data that they need, so that way they'll continue to support your program. As you're going through, if you are not able to reach your goals, funders want to know this. Don't hide anything from your funders. If you had difficulty reaching any of your objectives, if you notice that this is happening halfway through, stop, reach out to your funders, let them know, hey, we just had an administration change within the school district we're working on. We're working through it. I'm not sure how that's going to impact our program, but I wanted to give you a heads up. Transparency is so important to funders. If you're not able to reach your goals, explain why. Like I said, the administration changed, you lost a staff member, you didn't have enough books that came in, you didn't realize that the program wasn't having the impact that it needed, and you needed to make a switch. So have those conversations. Funders do want to hear from you. Do we have any questions so far? Everybody good, kind of hanging in there?
Everybody's pretty quiet.
Awesome. All right. Moving back. Program procedures. So program procedures, this is best practice. Let me know, put in the chat if any of you have program procedures. I'd be really curious. What program procedures are is your program fully written down, almost like that program Bible. It is going to include your overview and purpose. It will include the staff that's needed to make this program work and the amount of hours of that staff for the staff time, how many volunteers, the program activities. Be very specific when you're writing everything down. So let's say you're doing a book fair, write down how many tables you need. If you need tablecloths, the time you need to arrive. Everything that's written down, what you're doing is you are creating the best succession plan that you can. Because if your program procedures are written down, anybody can step in and continue to run that program regardless of the situation, because they'll know the budget and how much is needed. They'll know where the funding is coming from for that program. They'll know the timeline and the goals. They'll know the marketing plan. And in terms of marketing plan, one of the biggest things that I recommend is that you write down the language that you're using to describe your program. So that way, your volunteers, your staff members, your board, you're all using the same terminology to describe the program. It lends consistency and validity to your program. And finally, you want to put in that lessons learned. So let's say you tried distributing books outside when you're at the school, and it was a disaster. The books were falling on the floor, things were getting dirty, the kids were running around with them during recess. You want to write that in, because as a succession plan, the next person coming in may have that brilliant idea and say, I want to run this outside. Well, they can already look and see what the difficulties were. They may still choose to do it outside, but at least they'll understand what those risks are, and they'll work to mitigate them in advance. Again, this is gold standard. So in terms of having this written down, I'm sure I'm hearing a lot of, I don't have time to do that. That's going to take so much effort. The time you put in the front end is going to be a tremendous asset to you in the back end. Jill, did you want to say something?
I did. This is difficult. It's a lot to do. And I think it's got many different iterations in different nonprofits. But one of the things that I've learned is your program year ebbs and flows. And so when you have an ebb, when you've got a low tide, it's important to plan this in, because whether it's initial writing of it or an update, so that information stays current.
So that's a really good point. And what we did at Book Fairies is we actually took a pause. We took a week-long pause during the summer, and that was a chance where we could go back through and reevaluate each of our programs. And yes, that would be the perfect time to write this down. All right, we are moving right along. So again, with budgeting, we're not going to talk as much about budgeting, but I definitely wanted to hit on it. We do have a webinar coming up that will be in May with KPMG. The date is going to change. There was a conflict, so if you see it and sign up for it, just know that the date is going to change. But for budgeting, I wanted to hit on a couple things that are specific to the program that you're working on. There are two aspects to a budget. You have your revenue sources and you have your expenses. When you're looking at your revenue sources, for that program, you want to write down, are there grants that are specific to that program that can't be used for any other program? You want to be aware of that. Are you doing any fundraising for this specific program and that money needs to be tagged for that program? Are you doing any type of targeted corporate sponsorship or targeted outreach to individual donors? Just make sure that you have all of that written down, as well as any in-kind support that you receive from whether it's a publisher or an organization that's donating books. By having all this written down and knowing exactly how much your program cost, again, it's going to help when you're doing resource allocation, and it's going to help when you understand the fundraising component of how much you need to raise to make this program work. And then you have to look at the expenses. So there's direct expenses and indirect expenses in general. Direct expenses, those are going to be the staff salaries that you need to that are needed to run the program. Any program materials, supplies, travel time. Is there any outreach expenses, marketing, whether it's signs, newsletters, flyers, banners, anything that needs to go to make that program run is a direct expense. Indirect expenses for a nonprofit are going to be anything that is not directly tied to the program. So that will be your general rent, utilities, administrative staff, office supplies, insurance. But what you'll see is that I put indirect in parentheses and brackets, because there are many times where you can take a percentage of your indirect expenses and apply that to your program. So if you have a book bank and you're sorting books in the book bank, and those books are going to be used for a program where you're distributing out books, you can take a percentage of that rent, a percentage of the utilities, and apply that to your budget. Again, this is something where you're going to have to talk to your accountant or ask KPMG when we meet, but there are definite ways to allocate indirect expenses directly into your programs. Now, the main reason not the main. An important insight that you'll get from this budgeting is you're going to see how much that program actually costs to run, and you want to measure that against the impact that you're actually making. And there may be times where you take a step back and you look at the budget just for that one program and you say, holy cow, I'm actually spending a larger percentage of money on this program than I realized, and impacting significantly less people, or the change that I'm making is so much less than the change that I'm making in some of my other programs. And you may then want to reallocate some of that money to a different program. Or if you have 5, 6, 7 programs running, you may really want to consider whether this program is the right program, if that cost benefit ratio is significantly off from one another. All right. Moving into the good stuff. Impact, data, how do we measure it? What is the biggest struggle that nonprofits and book distribution organizations face? Data collection. What do we collect? How do we collect it? How are we using this information? What are we tracking? Why are we tracking? Too commonly, I hear it's too hard to track. We're a third-party provider. We can't say that we are directly making this change. And I think we can. I think if we're asking the right questions, I think if we're engaging the right stakeholders, we can definitely show that our book distribution programs are directly impacting the community, even if we're a third-party provider. You need to collect data. For anyone that's new on here, you need to collect data because this is how you're going to measure your success. Like I said in the very beginning, your collection of data may start with how many books did I give out? And that's fantastic. That is a great starting point. You then want to start thinking about what is that next step? What is that next piece of data that I can collect that I think funders want to see, that my board expects out of the program? What are the insights that I'm gaining from running my program? And I want to talk about the 2 different types of data. So to go all the way back to your high school days where we learned about qualitative and quantitative data. When you do data collection, make sure that you are collecting both types of data. They're both important. So qualitative data, those are the touchy-feely, emotional reactions that people have from the program that you're running. They are going to be how people view the program. How do kids feel when they get that book in their hands? How do teachers feel the program is running? Collect data from your donors, your volunteers also. How do they feel about the program? Volunteers, do they feel like they're making a difference, making an impact? Remember to collect data across the board. It's not just about your recipients, but it's about everybody else that is engaged within your nonprofit. This type of data you'll also collect in terms of thank you letters from the kids, thank you letters from the nonprofit you're partnering with or the school that you're working with. Take as many pictures and videos as you can. Different people need different information coming to them. When you're talking about quantitative data, these are going to be cold, hard facts. How many books did you give out? What is the current literacy rate? What is the change over time from literacy levels? How many teachers have you been interacting with? What are the specific demographics that you're working with? And the reason that I put on the bottom that right brain, left brain funder is because I think it's really important to understand that there are 2 very different types of people that require different types of information. You may not know which your funder is at first, but if you can figure this out, it's going to be a huge win. You may have a funder that is right-brained. They want the pictures of those kids. You want to invite them in when you're handing out books so they can get that visual. You want to send videos thanking them for their support. Make sure that those kids are saying that funder's name in the video or writing thank you notes directly to that funder. Having those testimonials that are speaking to the funder. So those are your right brain. They don't necessarily care how many books you gave out. They love to see the visual aspect and that emotional feel of the change that you're making. Then you have the left brain funders who will look at you and say, that's great, stop sending me videos. How many books did you give out? What are your impact numbers? What change are you making? How are you looking to grow the program? What are your next set of goals? Looking at that specific numbers-driven approach. So when you're talking to your funders, your wrap-up that you do, your middle, the middle report that you write, the interim report that you write, you want to gear that more towards numbers, factual-based information. Both sides need both, but what I'm talking about is where you really want to focus the information that you're giving to that particular funder. Again, one of the harder things is to figure out what we're asking. So let me pop back over here again. Something that is in the resource hub is going to be this data collection and impact surveys for book distribution. Everything that's in here, this is all suggestions, and we want your feedback and your responses when you're looking through this. Because NBAA, this is all where we're working together. So you may look at this and find a better way to help other people show their data. I want to hear from you. I want to see how I can continue to make this specific spreadsheet better, along with everything else. But if you're looking at this spreadsheet, what's on here, this very first tab, is all of those output information that you can collect. Number of children impacted, number of counties served, all the way down to number of volunteer hours, number of volunteers, number of Facebook likes, number of Instagram followers. These are all just the outputs that come from running the program. These are not driving change. But then what I did is you can pop over to the next tab, child, the child data. On your left, you're going to have, again, all of the outputs or the demographics that you can collect. But then there's also going to be questions to start figuring out what your impact is. So you can have a pre-survey question going to a child. And again, be careful when you do survey children. They are not the easiest, nor are they the most reliable, but I definitely wanted to have them included. And yes, we are going to share the presentation and slides afterwards. Thank you for saying the slides are good. My hope is that the slides can substitute for a lot of the information that I'm giving instead of just being talking points for myself. But these pre and post survey questions, such as, do you have books at home that you read? And then the responses, and here is what that impact is going to be. You're saying that you're using this question to determine the availability of reading material in the home. Same post survey, but here's a statement that you can then make. You can then say, following our book donation, there was a 10%, 15% increase in children reporting they have books at home. These are all the talking points that you're going to use in your marketing when you're doing your social media posts. This is the information that you're putting into the grants to show that you are doing an evidence-based, research-driven, numbers, data program that has shown results. Now, we did this for child, there's caregivers, teachers, librarians, volunteers. And then there's also feedback, which we're going to get to in just a minute. And so this is where I really do think that we can collect specific data. Two quick tips. The first one is only have one, maybe two open answer questions. Everything else, try and keep it to that Likert scale of strongly disagree to strongly agree, or somewhere along that line. It's going to make it a lot easier when you're collecting your data and you're trying to evaluate the results that you're getting. Another tip is to remove that center neutral number when you're doing the Likert scale. So it forces people to give you an answer. It's either going to be strongly disagree, disagree, agree, strongly agree. By removing that neutral, you're really forcing people to make that choice, and it's going to impact the numbers that you get. That was one. I hope I said the other one. Oh, no, the other one was try and collect as much data on the front side in the very beginning of the program, because that is when you are guaranteed to get the most answers. So if you have somebody that is requesting books from you, you are guaranteed to get every answer to your question, versus afterwards when you're reaching back out to them to find out what impact those books have. You're going to get a much lower response rate. So front load all of your questions. This is where you want to ask. Let's go back. This one is for teachers, but this is where you can find out the information about how many total books are in your current library. I believe my students have an adequate number of age-appropriate reading materials in their homes. Do you send books home? Let me go down here. What are the challenges that exist in your school or community? All of this data is going to be your case of support when you're writing your grants and you're going after funding. Have everybody fill this out. If people are just looking to get involved in your organization, but they haven't yet done a book request, but they want to be in your system, I would still have them fill all of this information out, even if they don't accept books from you. And the reason is, this is painting a picture of what the current landscape is for book access within the community. That's the most important thing, because you want to understand what current book access looks like. You want to understand, you want to get that data that you can then put into your reports. And again, we just have, one open chance answer. This survey is in the Resource Hub as well. And then you can ask the questions on the follow-up, such as since receiving books from your organization, I've seen a positive change in my students' attitude toward reading. When you're then presenting to your funders, you can say 89% of the people surveyed, so it's not always of the people received, but the people surveyed say that they've seen a positive change in my students' attitude toward reading. And I see we're getting a little tight on time. This is something that you can look through. We can always target this at a later time. But I just wanted to finish up with the very last slide, which is asking for feedback. I think sometimes we're nervous to ask for feedback about the quality of books we're giving out, the quantity of books we're giving out, the ease of ordering process, the delivery, because A, it's time consuming. But B, based on this information coming in, we may have to change how our program is running, and that may be difficult. And it's really important. Book Fairies is taking a big step back, and we're really reevaluating the quality of books that we're giving out, and that will impact the quantity that we're giving out. But based on feedback and talking to people, you start understanding how your program is working and any difficulties or challenges that your recipients are facing. So don't forget to go back and ask for feedback on your program and then institute those changes. It will make it stronger. And to go back to the funders, you can then say to funders, we've run this program. These are the feedback that we've received. This was difficult. We're changing it for next year, and our program is going to be stronger because we're talking to the community and instituting these changes. All right, I am going to stop sharing. And I want to see you guys have thoughts, questions, feedback. Give me feedback on how the presentation went.
We
I
have
think
in
you
the
touched
chats.
on a lot of, oh, go ahead, Jill, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that Diane said it was so helpful, and great job, and thank you.
Awesome.
Amy, I had a question, because I know you were talking, we're having this issue about Title I schools and how do you identify Title I schools? Is that something everybody else is running up against? And how do they identify for the programs that you're making sure that you're giving it to the people that you want to be giving it to? Anybody?
Is anybody having this problem as well? You can nod your head or raise your hand.
I'll just say that CMS, we're fine with CMS. They're pretty open about their list of Title I. So we have not had this issue.
What's the name of that?
So Charlotte Mecklenburg schools,
Oh.
yeah, we
Okay.
haven't had an issue. They're pretty upfront, and also we have a pretty decent local news reporter who's part of the NPR kind of branch for Charlotte. And every year they put out a list of the Title I schools. So you might make friends with whoever your ed reporter is, because they tend to spend a little extra time digging and going and essentially nagging the school system to tell them the answer to that. So
So
That's great.
Your school district, depending on their administration, should have a Title I department or Title I support department. And I've found that the last time I was working with this data, we were trying to determine how many Title I schools we could serve, and based on their percentage of free and reduced lunch. So we would say, okay, well, this year, this is our budget, we can serve down to 85%. And then we would get the Title I list from the district and identify the schools and offer the program to them. If they didn't accept, we could go down lower on the list. But the school district should be happy to share that information with you.
Yeah, we service a pretty large area where, in New York, where the Hamptons to the Bronx. So it's a lot.
Many school districts.
And we used to use a national database, which has changed. So
And so has Title I, because when I first started, Title I was 50% or more free or reduced lunch, and now it's down to 40%. So again, that goes back to looking at the resources that you have. Are you looking to generalize to Title I, which would be you're serving 40% of the kids that need it, but there's 60% of those kids that hypothetically can afford books, Or do you want to look at what are your resources and the impact you want to make, like Jill is saying, and set a limit? We're only going, even if you're Title I, we're only going to serve people that are 75% or more free or reduced lunch. And that may impact some of your current recipients. But again, it's what is the impact that you want, what is the greatest impact you can make with the resources that you have available?
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? We've got 2 minutes. Brenda?
Amy, I thought the program was just wonderful this morning, very informative, so thank you. My question would be about future growth. If we could address how you know when your program is ready to grow and the best way to grow it. You know, our organization is 2 years old and we're currently working on a strategic plan that includes growth. But I'd like to hear ideas about your pros and cons of doing that.
So I can give an answer to that, but does anybody else want to jump in who has gone through that growth process? Okay, so one of the first things that you want to do is definitely sit down with your board and make sure that everybody is on the same page as to what growth looks like. You may have people that are thinking that this is a great program, I want to continue to grow it until it's national. And you may have other people with that, when I was talking about before, do you want to hit a larger area with less or a smaller area with more? Who want to keep things limited in scope. So the first thing is just making sure that the board is all aligned with how much growth you're looking for. And then it would come down to budgeting. If you have a budget set for how much your programs cost, you can then realistically look, can we include this next school district because it is going to cost us X number of dollars to run this program? And do I have the resources to raise that money to reach that group? So I think being very strategic and just very specific and intentional in how that growth takes place. So that way you continue to support the people that you've been supporting initially. You don't lose them as you continue to grow. Does anyone else have things to add to that?
I just want to add that growing slowly has benefited us because it helped us maintain quality. But now we're looking at, we reached our initial goals for our first strategic plan. And so we're looking exactly at the question Amy was addressing is, do we do more per school, or do we look to serve more schools, broad or wide or depth? And it's really important to have the board on board and to have them and your stakeholders and make sure to get their feedback.
Right,
Awesome.
thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your week. And next month, we'll have a happy hour, which is just a good time for us to hang out and chit chat with one another. So definitely look for that date coming up. Thank you.